All right, segment two cut off, but I didn't progress actually much beyond it, so not much backtracking. Um, so we did end talking about Aga Muhammad Khan and his ascent to power at the close of the 18th century by 1796. What I want to do now for the remainder of this lecture is to turn attention toward developments taking place within the Ottoman Empire. By the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire had involved itself in conflicts with the neighbors to the east and the west. And this would continue to be the case into the 17th and even the 18th centuries. So the Ottoman Empire is occupying a part of the Eurasian landmass that really is at the crossroads of each. It has basically a foothold in both Europe and Asia itself. And so as a result, it has European rivals like that of the Habsburg dynasty and also that of the Safavid Empire as well, that we just discussed at some length. From 1593 to 1606, the Ottoman Empire would be have strained relations and actually come into contact with the Habsburg authorities. Kind of having control over portions of um, you know the Holy Roman Empire, but then also a substantial claim to areas of what is today Austria, Hungary, and butting up against the Balkan region. And so, as a result, this kind of made the Habsburgs a natural competitor, if not outright enemy of Ottoman interests. Um, Much of this conflict during the close of the 16th and early 16th century, again 1593 to 1606, was the result of destabilizing effects the Habsburg presence had on the frontier provinces that were under Ottoman control. Provinces such as Wallachia, Moldova, Transylvania, they began to rise up in rebellion against the uh, Ottoman Turks, mainly because these three provinces in particular had a very kind of substantial Christian population. And so, in many respects, they didn't necessarily identify with a Muslim-facing state, the Ottoman Turks, and instead they wished to be under the authority of the Christian-oriented uh, Habsburg dynasty and the Habsburg state. These were costly conflicts for the Ottomans, and this was only compounded by renewed threats from both the Iranian region and the Safavid Empire more specifically. So, almost for much of its history, the Ottoman Empire was suffering from these external pressures on either side of its official eastern-western borders. There were also internal revolts that rocked the Ottoman Empire as well, and these would not be suppressed until as late as 1609. So, in combination, these factors forced the Ottomans to sue for peace with the Habsburgs, um, which marked, again, this kind of perpetual problem for the Ottoman Empire itself, that it was took an exhaustive toll on the empire, having to fend off so many threats, internal and external, in order to maintain its authority and its sovereignty. And because of its multicultural aspects, it had to deal with, among others, kind of a very strong Sunni Shiite sect. These, though they were both Muslim communities, they were oftentimes at odds with one another. The Ottoman Empire itself was a predominantly Sunni state itself. You also had the Muslim Christian stress and tension as well. Arab versus Turk, as far as ethnic lines were concerned. And this is just kind of a smattering of examples. I mean, there were a host of different ethnic groups, religions, economic interests, security concerns when it came to how the Ottomans were going to categorize, kind of prioritize their interests over such an extensive geography and geographic region that they, laid claim to. Interestingly enough, also for the Ottoman Empire, when it came to matters of diplomacy, they were rarely had the advantage or the initiative in conducting negotiations. Um, they were not able necessarily to reach terms of peace where they were the ones dictating the terms themselves when it came to the application and installment of international treaties. That they were always kind of on their heels. They were always, operating from a position of just simply trying to negotiate a peace that would buy them time to kind of try and get their house in order. So there was no position of strength that they were operating from, and this would be the case pretty much during this period of time, the 17th and even into the 18th century. It's not to say that the Ottomans were obsolete or irrelevant by any means. Some successes and kind of cultural developments that they achieved during occurring roughly at the same period of time. We have in the 1610s the construction of the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, the construction of another landmark mosque in Cairo, what is today Egypt, um, in the Ottoman kind of imperial style. So what that means is that they are still have a measure of influence when it comes to kind of cultural projection. And also, they were able to establish treaties of commerce with the Netherlands in 1612. But they were, in essence, an idling state. They weren't necessarily collapsing, or the erosion that was taking place was very slow. And they were by no means really a power on the rise any longer. Um, in 1638, they were able to take Baghdad back from the Safavid Empire once and for all. That's kind of a feather in their cap. Um, they were able to even also exert control in the Eastern Mediterranean with the conquest of Crete occurring between 1645 and 1669. But just in context with those successes, um, they also were victims of tragic setbacks, one of which came at the hands of the Venetian navy, which was able to blockade the Dardanelles, basically the narrow waterway connecting the Black Sea to the Eastern Mediterranean. The Venetian navy was able to do so was able to establish a blockade from 1648 to 1654, which in effect halted all grain shipments coming from Syria and Egypt, um, and served as the lifeline for the inhabitants of Istanbul, the capital of um, the Ottoman Empire during that period of time. And so, simply by cutting off the shipment of food to the capital city meant that the inhabitants of the city itself were on the verge of starvation. And so, it was an Achilles heel. It was something that demonstrated the weakness, the kind of inherent weakness of the Ottoman state. The Venetians kind of rubbed salt in the wound in 1556 when they destroyed the Ottoman fleet that had been assembled and sent out to try and break the blockade. Later in 1672, from 1672 to 1676, the Ottomans would go to war with Poland. This came as a result of the Ottomans gaining control of what is southwestern Ukraine, um, and having the rest of the Ukraine region fall under the Sultan's suzerainty. So, suzerainty is where uh, the Ottomans or a power does not have official control over an area, but they, through their mere presence in the region, are able to have those inhabitants of a region, a neighboring region, um, recognize the authority of the power that has established itself in the region. The following year, the Ottomans went to war with Russia, a war lasting from 1677 to 1681. So, simply because they move into and are trying to establish control over the Black Sea region, taking over things like Crimea, but then also moving into parts of what is today the Ukraine, this opens the door to then upsetting the balance of power, and to which Russia and Poland are going to have to respond, and they do so. So the Ottomans here have immediate trouble with enforcing their authority, their suzerainty in this region. The Ottomans were forced to relinquish control of Ukrainian territory beyond the Dnieper River, and this is really kind of where the Ottoman Empire was. It did not have any room to maneuver as far as being able to exert its authority, and take advantage of any types of opportunity as far as weakness was concerned from any of its neighbors. By 1683, the Ottomans turned attention once again to the Austrian Habsburgs. This leads to what's known as the Second Siege of Vienna in 1683. This is a devastating defeat for the Ottomans. And in fact, the siege was broken, and the defeat was so bad that the Ottoman commander, the commander in chief of the Ottoman forces that laid siege to Vienna itself, was executed en route back to Istanbul. That he had lost that much favor with his troops, as a result of this humiliating defeat. That same year, the Ottomans would engage in what's known as the war with the Holy League, lasting from 1683 to 1699. This was an alliance that was formed between the Habsburgs, the authorities in Venice, Poland, and also in Russia. And they were all allied against the Ottomans. As a result of this conflict, the war with the Holy League, the Ottomans lost control over Hungary, Transylvania, Croatia, Slovenia, Serbia, and Macedonia. And the Danube River really became the new line of defense for the Ottoman sphere of influence in the area of southeastern Europe. And that would be a slow process of retreat, whereby on the eve of the Ottomans' collapse in the early 20th century, they had nothing more than a toehold on the European continent itself. By the close of the 17th century, 1699, the Ottomans resorted to signing the Treaty of Karlowitz with the Russians. The Russians, as a result of this treaty, ascended to become the dominant power within the Black Sea region. More broadly speaking, the treaty marked the beginning of the Ottomans' withdrawal from impacting European affairs more broadly. That from here on out, from 1699 onward, the Ottomans were going to shift to a more and more defensive posture, just trying to hold on to the frontiers, the sphere of influence that the empire had for itself, and that would be a slow and steady process of decline. Europe here by 1699 gained the initiative in southeastern Europe and the eastern Mediterranean. Internally, within the Ottoman state, we see kind of a very kind of pitchy uh, era in which there are kind of some high points of cultural development, namely with the establishing of the tulip period from 1703 to 1730. But then this would also be kind of followed closely on the heels of or, with natural disasters and other kind of emergencies within the Ottoman state itself. To begin with the tulip period, This era started actually with an internal rebellion in which the Janissaries in Istanbul were joined by thousands of soldiers, tradesmen, and ul- ulama, religious leaders in many respects. And they were able to, kind of seize control. This became a period of extravagance and cultural vibrance within the Ottoman Empire. It was characterized by the elites developing an obsession with and for tulips, uh, plant. Um, we also see during this period of time the first Arabic printing press in the Arab world being established. Interestingly, this was set up by Christians in the Levant region. So it didn't take place within Istanbul itself. It took place, kind of in the areas of what is today Israel and parts of Syria and also Lebanon. And it was not the Muslims that did it, but the Christian subset community within the Ottoman Empire itself. Wars did continue throughout the Tulip period. In addition to fighting with its traditional European adversaries in 1711, the Ottomans also had to deal with a rebellion that erupted within Egypt, which was under Ottoman control at the time. Ottoman authority was in Egypt was again caught on its heels and relegated to that of simply being a figurehead. Um, and the Ottomans would not be managed to reimpose control and authority in and over Egypt until 1786. Throughout much of the 18th century, again the 1700s, the Ottomans were preoccupied with increasingly weak and ineffective sultans. Um, so, right at the moment that you need concerted, deliberative, charismatic, and effective leadership is the exact moment when the Ottomans have, uh, an absence of that um, from the Sultan and the throne itself. As I mentioned, there would be also a period of natural disasters that would rock the Ottoman Empire. There would be a series of devastating fires in Istanbul in both 1755 and 1756 that would run roughshod throughout the city itself, um, leaving much of the population destitute. There would also be an earthquake in the Levant region in 1759. If you remember, just a few decades ago, there was severe earthquakes in Turkey. It's the same region. It's a very seismically active area. And so in 1759, an earthquake hit, devastating the countryside, upsetting the order of things, and also, kind of diminishing the livelihood of the inhabitants located there. And of course, the Ottoman state had to marshal resources in order to see to the provisioning of those people. Well, when the state's not well equipped to do so, either from the central positions of power because there's ineffective leadership, but also the state is aging and diminishing as far as its authority is concerned anyway. This is going to create problems, and kind of natural disasters are going to accentuate that weakness, which they did. And there would also be during this period of time continued intermittent war with European powers. By the end of the 18th century, in 1798 to 1801, you have the French occupation of Egypt, with the likes of Napoleon Bonaparte beginning to launch an invasion there. Um, the French themselves were stranded after the British managed to defeat the fleet, the French fleet that had delivered the French troops to Egypt. So France was had no real alternative but to surrender and do the best to evacuate. But rather than the Ottomans reassuming control over Egypt, it was Britain who takes control of Egypt. And the Egyptian population here at this time begins to be exposed to European modes of warfare, of administration, taxation, and scientific inquiry. In many respects, the introduction of French and British influence into Egypt marked the dawn of modernization um, in the Middle East, and also the westernization of the Middle East in many respects. So this gets us to a point where we're in pretty good position to kind of tie things up here as far as the wrap up is concerned, kind of draw some themes together. Again, in India, you have a distinct power base and administrative bureaucracy being put into effect um, that it increasingly began to be encroached upon by the British, however, and the British Crown specifically, which is best exampled by the installment of the India Act itself and the Code of Cornwallis as well. So that by the later portions of the 18th century, moving into the 19th century, it's Britain who has, by and large, successfully subdued the Indian subcontinent and enrolled it into, the British Empire itself, incorporated it into the British Empire itself. With regard to China and the Qing dynasty, we continue to see efforts to assume territorial expansion. There's also, again, continued cultural growth taking place. There's an increased kind of diplomatic presence that the Qing dynasty is achieving for itself, specifically with regard to its immediate neighbors like Russia. But by the close of the 18th century, the 1700s, we do see signs of internal rot within the Chinese bureaucracy. Rampant corruption begins to emerge, and the consequences of which begin to be felt within China itself. And this would put China in a tough spot as we begin to turn attention towards the 19th century, which we'll do in future lectures. Again, it puts the it gives a measure of initiative, a measure of influence and advantage to European powers like Britain, in particular, among others, that are really going to begin to exploit the conditions not only within India, as just covered, but also moving forward in China, especially in the 19th century. In Southwest Asia, we see maybe what might be best described as an atrophying of states with regard to the Safavid Empire and the Ottoman Empire. The Safavid Empire was going to succumb to more powerful and more ascendant neighbors, that being the Russians themselves, but also even other entities, not maybe official states, but Afghan leadership coming from Nadir Khan, among others. The Ottoman Empire was also beginning to show signs of age with its almost constant warfare with rivals, regional rivals, not only the Safavid Empire, but also more formidable European powers to the west. The Second Siege of Vienna, in many cases, in 1683, served as kind of the high water mark for Ottoman ascendance and influence. And with the lack of consistency when it came to sultan rule and poor governance that began to be manifest itself in the Ottoman bureaucracy. This is going to lead to periods of instability, domestic insurrection, and as a result, it would lead to parts of the empire, specifically Egypt, serving as a prime example of Egyptians rising up against the Ottoman state. But then also by the close of the 18th century, you see the introduction of European influence, France and Britain beginning to understand that they have an opportunity to begin to assert control over what was once Ottoman controlled areas of the Middle East, primarily, again, Egypt. So, That gets us to the end of this lecture. We will, in future lectures, begin to turn attention towards the Industrial Revolution, which is key to understanding exactly how Europe in particular begins to be so potent as far as its dominance and exercising its dominance over the rest of the world. That industrial technology begins to allow this continent of Europe and the powers therein to punch above their weight in many respects when it comes to subjugating enormous swaths of territory and large amounts of the human population itself, bringing them under the control of these relatively small states of Europe. Then we'll also look at the kind of revolutionary era coming as a result of the experiences of not only the American Revolution, but the French Revolution towards the tail end of the 18th century. So be on the lookout for those, and I will see you next time.